"He is not mentally stable. Do not let him in." That is what my mother told the restaurant. Our restaurant. The place where I met my wife, where I proposed to her, where we celebrated every anniversary for 9 years until the night she died. I found out what my mother had said because the manager told me. He stood in the doorway with an apologetic expression, blocking my path, explaining that they had received a call earlier that day warning them about me. "I am sorry, sir. We were told you might become agitated, that you have not been well since your wife's passing. We have other guests to consider." "I made a reservation," I said. "Table 7. I make the same reservation every year." "I understand. But given the circumstances." "What circumstances?" "That I want to have dinner at the place where my wife and I fell in love." He shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, your mother was very specific. She said you have been having episodes, that you might cause a scene. I am sure you understand our position." I understood their position perfectly. I just did not understand why my mother would do this to me. I stood outside the restaurant for a long time, watching through the window as other couples ate at tables that should have been ours. The rain started around 7, a cold autumn drizzle that soaked through my jacket and plastered my hair to my forehead. I did not move. I just stood there watching, remembering. That was when the old man approached me. He came out of the restaurant slowly, pausing under the awning to open his umbrella. He was in his 70s, well-dressed, with the bearing of someone who had spent his life in a profession that demanded precision and composure. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he walked over and held his umbrella so that it covered both of us. "You are Sarah's husband," he said. It was not a question. "How do you know my wife?" "I was her doctor for the last 3 years of her life." Something in his tone made my stomach clench. Her doctor? Sarah was healthy. She did not have a doctor. She did not tell you about me because she did not want you to worry. And because... He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. Because she was afraid of what might happen if certain people found out what she knew. "What are you talking about?" He reached into his coat and pulled out a manila envelope. The accident report was altered. The police investigation was compromised. Your wife did not die the way they told you she died. He pressed the envelope into my hands. She called me that night, 2 hours before the crash. She was terrified. She said she had discovered something about your family, something they had been hiding for decades. She said she was going to confront them, and she wanted me to have a copy of the documents in case something happened to her. The rain was running down my face now. Mixing with tears, I did not realize I was crying. "I should have gone to the police," he continued. "But the documents she gave me implicated people with connections. People who could make problems for an old doctor with a small practice." He shook his head. "I have been a coward for a year. But when I saw you standing out here in the rain, being turned away from the place where you loved her, I could not stay silent anymore." He stepped back, leaving me alone with the envelope. "Read it," he said, "and then decide what to do. But be careful. The people who killed your wife are still protecting their secrets." He walked away into the rain, disappearing into the darkness, and I stood there holding the envelope that would change everything I thought I knew about my family. For a long moment, I could not move. The rain continued to fall, soaking through my jacket, running down my face like tears. The restaurant glowed behind me, warm and inviting, full of people celebrating anniversaries and birthdays and ordinary Tuesday nights. I had been one of those people once. I had sat at table 7 with Sarah, celebrating our love, believing the world was fundamentally fair and good. I had trusted my family, believed in their decency, accepted without question that they loved me and wanted the best for me. Now I stood in the rain, holding evidence that everything I believed was a lie. I thought about going back inside, demanding that the manager seat me, making a scene the way my mother had predicted I would. I thought about confronting my family immediately, throwing the envelope in their faces, demanding answers to questions I did not even know how to ask. Instead, I walked to my car. I sat behind the wheel, staring at the envelope, trying to gather the courage to open it. My name is Marcus Webb, and this is the story of how I discovered that my wife was murdered by the people I trusted most. I should tell you about Sarah first, because none of this makes sense without understanding who she was and why someone would want her dead. But before I tell you about Sarah, I need to tell you about my family, about the people who raised me, who shaped me, who I believed loved me unconditionally until I discovered they were capable of the most unforgivable betrayal. My mother, Eleanor Webb, was the kind of woman who commanded attention when she walked into a room. Not because she was loud or dramatic, but because she carried herself with an authority that suggested she knew things other people did not. She had inherited the family business when my grandfather died in 1987, and she had run it with an iron fist ever since. My brother, Daniel, was 3 years older than me. He had always been the golden child, the one who followed in our mother's footsteps, who learned the family business from the inside, who was groomed from childhood to take over when our mother retired. He had the same calculating intelligence as our mother, the same ability to smile while planning something terrible. My sister, Catherine, was 2 years younger than me. She had always seemed softer than the others, more emotional, more likely to show vulnerability. I had thought that meant she was different from them. I was wrong. She was just better at hiding what she was. And then there was me, Marcus, the middle child, the one who had never quite fit into the family mold. I had gone to business school because it was expected, but I had never had the stomach for the ruthless competition that my mother and brother seemed to thrive on. I preferred analysis to negotiation, research to deal-making. I was good at understanding systems, at seeing patterns that others missed. That should have made me suspicious of my own family. It should have made me see the inconsistencies in their stories, the unexplained wealth, the business dealings that never quite made sense when I examined them closely. But I did not see any of that, because they were my family, and you do not suspect the people you love of being criminals. Sarah Chun was the most alive person I ever met. That sounds like something people say about anyone who dies young, a cliché that smooths over the complicated reality of who someone actually was. But with Sarah, it was literally true. She moved through the world like every moment mattered, like every conversation was an opportunity, like every day was a gift she refused to take for granted. We met at that restaurant, Giovanni's, on a rainy Tuesday in October. I was 28 years old, recently promoted to senior analyst at an investment firm, eating dinner alone because I had just ended a relationship and did not know what else to do with my evening. She was at the next table, also alone, also eating dinner, also clearly going through something. We kept catching each other's eyes, the way strangers do when they recognize something familiar in each other's solitude. She spoke first. "Bad day or bad week?" she asked, nodding at the wine glass I was refilling for the 3rd time. "Bad month," I said. "You? Bad year. But this pasta is helping." She smiled, and something in my chest that had been clenched for weeks finally relaxed. We talked for 3 hours that night. The restaurant emptied around us, the staff politely waiting for us to leave, but neither of us wanted to break the spell of that conversation. She was a journalist, investigative work mostly, the kind of reporting that required patience and persistence and a willingness to make powerful people uncomfortable. She worked for a regional newspaper, but her stories had been picked up by national outlets on several occasions. She had a reputation for being thorough, for following leads that other reporters would have abandoned, for caring about truth in an industry that increasingly valued speed over accuracy. She had just finished a piece that had cost her a relationship and several friendships, and she was questioning whether it had been worth it. The story had exposed corruption in a local housing authority, had resulted in multiple resignations and 1 criminal indictment. But the process of reporting it had consumed her life for 18 months. "I missed birthdays," she said. "Holidays. The kind of everyday moments that you do not realize are important until they are gone. And for what? A story that will be forgotten in a month. The people whose lives were affected will not forget," I said. "The families who were being denied housing because someone was skimming from the budget. They will remember." She looked at me with surprise, like she had not expected that response. "Most people tell me I should find a less demanding job, that I take my work too seriously." "The truth matters," I said. "That is what you believe, right? That is why you do what you do." "It is what I want to believe. Sometimes I wonder if I am the only one who thinks so." I think so too, I said. I just do not have the courage to do anything about it. I sit in an office all day, analyzing numbers, helping wealthy people become wealthier. I tell myself it is respectable work, but it is not changing anything. It is not making the world better. She looked at me with those sharp, assessing eyes, the eyes of someone who was used to evaluating people, separating the sincere from the performers. Maybe you will someday. Courage is not something you are born with. It is something you build. That conversation planted a seed that would not fully bloom until years later, until after she was gone and I was forced to become the kind of person she had believed I could be. I proposed to her at the same restaurant 2 years later, at the same table where we had met. She said yes before I finished asking the question. I had barely gotten the words out, my voice shaking, my hands trembling as I held open the ring box, when she grabbed my face and kissed me and said, "Yes, yes, of course yes." The whole restaurant applauded. The owner, Giovanni himself, came over with a bottle of champagne on the house. Sarah was crying, laughing, showing off the ring to strangers at nearby tables who had become temporary participants in our joy. It was the happiest moment of my life. We were married for 7 years. 7 years of partnership and growth and the kind of love that makes you a better person just by being near it. She pushed me to be braver. I helped her to be softer. We balanced each other in ways that felt miraculous, like we had been designed to fit together. Then, 14 months ago, she died. The call came at 3 in the morning. That is when death always calls, in the middle of the night, when your defenses are down and the world feels surreal. A state trooper with a sympathetic voice, telling me there had been an accident, asking if I could come to the hospital to identify the body. I do not remember driving there. I do not remember parking, walking through the emergency room doors, being led to a cold room in the basement where my wife lay on a metal table covered with a white sheet. I remember the moment they pulled back the sheet. I remember her face, peaceful despite the bruises, looking like she was sleeping. I remember saying her name, hoping somehow she would open her eyes, knowing she never would. I remember the doctor explaining that the crash had killed her instantly, that she did not suffer, that there was nothing anyone could have done. I remember wanting to scream, to cry, to tear the room apart with my bare hands. Instead, I nodded politely, signed papers, made phone calls. I did what you do when someone you love dies. I became numb, mechanical, a robot performing the tasks the living require when death intrudes. The official story was simple. She was driving home from an interview, late at night, on a winding road outside the city. She lost control of her car. It went over an embankment and rolled 3 times. She was killed on impact. The police called it an accident. Single vehicle crash, no witnesses, no evidence of foul play. Just a tragic loss, the kind of thing that happens when someone drives too fast on a wet road. I believed them. I had no reason not to. Sarah was a careful driver, but accidents happen. People die every day in ways that make no sense. I grieved her the way you grieve someone taken too soon, with anger and confusion and a desperate search for meaning that never quite arrives. The first few weeks were a blur. I barely remember the funeral, except for the sea of faces, the murmured condolences, the flowers that kept arriving until our living room looked like a botanical garden. I remember standing at the graveside, watching them lower her coffin into the ground, feeling like part of myself was being buried with her. My family was supportive in their way. My mother came to stay with me for 2 weeks after the funeral. She cooked meals I could not eat, cleaned a house I did not care about, made phone calls I could not face. At the time, I was grateful for her presence. I did not notice how carefully she was watching me, how many questions she asked about Sarah's work, about her files, about what she might have left behind. My sister Catherine called every day, sometimes twice a day. She wanted to know how I was sleeping, what I was eating, whether I had been going through Sarah's things yet. I thought she was being a concerned sibling. I did not realize she was gathering intelligence, reporting back to my mother about my state of mind and my activities. My brother Daniel offered to help with the paperwork. The insurance claims, the death certificate, the dozen bureaucratic tasks that death creates for the living. He was efficient and thorough, handling everything with the same cold competence he brought to his business dealings. I was relieved to have one less thing to worry about. I did not know then that he was the one who had accessed Sarah's laptop after her death, that he had spent hours searching through her files, looking for the research she had been conducting on our family, that he had reported to my mother that Sarah's documents were encrypted and would require professional help to access. I did not know that my family was more afraid of what Sarah might have discovered than they were sad about her death. I thought they were helping me because they loved me. I thought they were being kind. I did not know they were watching me, waiting to see if Sarah had told me anything before she died, waiting to see if I would become a problem that needed to be dealt with. I opened the envelope in my car, parked in the lot behind the restaurant, rain drumming on the roof. Inside were documents, photocopies of bank statements, property records, corporate filings, legal papers covered in dense text that I could barely understand in the dim light, and a letter, handwritten, in Sarah's distinctive script. Marcus, if you are reading this, something has happened to me. I am sorry. I wanted to tell you everything, but I was afraid of what it would mean for us, for your family, for the life we had built together. I have been investigating a story for the past 8 months. It started as something small, a tip about financial irregularities at a development company. But the more I dug, the more I found. And the trail led somewhere I never expected. It led to your family. Your mother, your brother, your sister. They are all involved in something that goes back decades. Money laundering, real estate fraud, and something else, something worse that I am still trying to understand. I confronted them last week. I told them I knew. I gave them a chance to explain, to come clean, to make it right. They smiled and nodded and said they would think about it. I think they are going to kill me. I know how that sounds. I know you will think I am being paranoid. But I have been doing this work for 15 years, and I know when people are afraid. And your family is afraid of what I know. If something happens to me, do not believe the official story. Find Dr. Bernard Hollister. He has copies of everything. He will know what to do. I love you, Marcus. I am sorry I kept this from you. I was trying to protect you. I hope you can forgive me. Sarah. I sat in the car for an hour, reading the letter over and over, feeling the ground shift beneath everything I thought I knew. My family, my mother who had helped me through the funeral, my brother who had handled the insurance paperwork, my sister who had called every day to check on me. They had killed my wife, and then they had spent the last 14 months pretending to comfort me while they made sure I never discovered the truth. I did not go home that night. I drove to a motel outside the city, paid cash for a room, and spent the next 12 hours reading through the documents Sarah had left behind. The scope of what she had uncovered was staggering. It started in the early 80s when my grandfather was still alive. He had been a real estate developer, moderately successful, with a portfolio of commercial properties throughout the region. When he died in 1987, he left everything to my grandmother, who had no interest in running a business, and handed control to my mother and her siblings. That was when things changed. The documents showed a pattern of transactions that made no sense if you assumed they were legitimate. Properties bought for far more than their market value. Renovation contracts awarded to companies that barely existed. Rental income that did not match occupancy rates. Cash flowing in from sources that could not be traced. Sarah had spent months mapping the network. Shell companies in Delaware and Nevada. Bank accounts in the Caymans and Switzerland. A web of paperwork designed to obscure the simple fact that my family had been laundering money for over 3 decades. The names on the documents were a who's who of my childhood. People who had come to our house for holidays, who had attended my graduation, who had sent gifts when I got married. Lawyers and accountants and business partners who had seemed like respectable professionals but who were, according to Sarah's research, co-conspirators in an elaborate criminal enterprise. The source of the money was harder to determine. Sarah's notes mentioned several possibilities. Drug trafficking seemed most likely, given the geographic patterns and the timing of certain deposits. But there were also references to human smuggling, illegal gambling operations, and something she called the medical operation that appeared multiple times without explanation. She had not been able to confirm which one, or whether it was all of them. But she had confirmed enough to destroy my family if it ever became public. The evidence was meticulous. Bank statements showing transfers from shell companies to my mother's personal accounts. Property records showing buildings purchased at inflated prices, the difference between market value and purchase price disappearing into offshore accounts. Corporate filings that traced the ownership of dummy corporations back to family members through layers of intermediaries. Sarah had been building this case for 8 months. 8 months of following paper trails, interviewing sources, connecting dots that spanned 3 decades. She had been living a double life, working on her regular assignments while secretly investigating the family she had married into. I tried to imagine what that must have been like for her. Coming to family dinners knowing what she knew. Sitting across from my mother at holidays, making small talk, pretending everything was normal while she documented crimes that could send all of them to prison. She must have felt so alone, so trapped between her commitment to the truth and her love for me, so afraid of what would happen when everything came out. And she had confronted them with that knowledge. The timeline in her notes was precise. She had met with my mother on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 days before she died. She had presented the evidence, offered them a chance to cooperate with authorities in exchange for reduced charges, tried to give them a way out that did not involve prison. My mother had thanked her for bringing it to her attention, had promised to discuss it with the family, had asked for a few days to consider their options. 3 days later, Sarah was dead. I wanted to go to the police. That was my first instinct, the obvious response to discovering that your wife was murdered by your own family. But Sarah's notes warned against it. Local police compromised, she had written. Captain Morrison has received payments through the foundation for at least 10 years. Do not trust anyone in the department. The foundation, that was my family's charitable organization, the one that gave scholarships to local students and funded community programs. The one that made us look like pillars of the community while it served as a conduit for bribes and influence payments. If the police were compromised, I needed to go higher. Federal authorities, the FBI, someone outside the network my family had built over 30 years. But I also needed to be smart. I needed to gather more evidence. I needed to build a case that could not be dismissed or covered up. And I needed to do it without letting my family know I was onto them. That was the hardest part. Pretending everything was normal. Answering my mother's calls, having dinner with my brother, attending my sister's birthday party. Smiling and nodding and playing the role of the grieving widower while inside I was burning with rage. Every interaction became a performance. When my mother asked how I was doing, I had to modulate my voice to sound appropriately sad but stable. When my brother suggested we get together for a drink, I had to pretend I was not imagining wrapping my hands around his throat. When my sister hugged me and told me she was there for me, I had to fight the urge to push her away and scream the truth at her. The hardest moments were the family dinners. My mother insisted on maintaining them, said they were important for my recovery, said I needed to be around people who loved me. She would sit at the head of the table, presiding over the meal like a benevolent monarch, asking about my work, my health, my plans for the future. And I would sit there, eating food that tasted like ashes, answering questions with carefully constructed lies, knowing that everyone at that table had participated in covering up my wife's murder. I studied them during those dinners, watched their faces, their body language, the way they looked at each other when they thought I was not paying attention. I was looking for signs of guilt, for cracks in their facades, for any indication that they were not as confident as they appeared. What I saw instead was calculation. They were watching me too, evaluating my mental state, testing whether I was still the naive, grieving husband they needed me to be. My mother asked me once if I had been going through Sarah's files. I found some boxes of her research in the basement, she said, casual, innocent, as if the question had just occurred to her. I thought you might want to look through them. Make sure there is nothing sensitive that should be destroyed. My heart rate spiked, but I kept my face calm. I have not had the energy to deal with her things yet, I lied. Maybe next month. She nodded, satisfied. But I saw something flicker in her eyes. Suspicion. Calculation. The look of someone who was not entirely sure they were safe. I needed to move faster. That night, I went through Sarah's encrypted files again. using the password she had hidden in the letter. I found something I had missed before, a folder labeled Insurance. Inside were video files, recordings of conversations Sarah had conducted with sources, people who had worked for my family's businesses and witnessed things they should not have witnessed. A former accountant who described falsified tax returns. A property manager who talked about tenants being evicted to make room for special clients. A construction foreman who mentioned buildings that had rooms that did not appear on any official plans. Sarah had been building her case for months, and she had known, even then, that she might not survive to see it through. The last recording was dated 3 days before her death. It was a conversation between Sarah and a man I did not recognize at first, an older gentleman with a distinguished bearing and a careful way of speaking. Dr. Bernard Hollister, the man who had approached me in the rain. In the recording, Sarah told him everything. About the money laundering, about the shell companies, about her decision to confront my mother. She gave him copies of her research and asked him to keep them safe. "If something happens to me," she said on the recording, "make sure Marcus finds out the truth. He deserves to know what his family really is." "What about going to the police?" Dr. Hollister asked. "The local police are compromised. Captain Morrison has been on the family payroll for years. If I go to them, the evidence will disappear and I will have a tragic accident." She paused. "If something happens to me, Marcus will need to go federal. FBI, DOJ, someone outside the local network. And you think your mother-in-law is capable of harming you?" "I think she is capable of anything to protect what she has built. She has been laundering money for 30 years. She is not going to let a journalist bring it all down." I listened to that recording 4 times, memorizing Sarah's voice, the fear underneath her professional composure, the love she expressed for me even as she prepared for the possibility of her own death. She had known. She had known they might kill her, and she had done it anyway because she believed the truth was worth dying for. The FBI contacted me 3 weeks after I submitted my evidence through the whistleblower hotline. Before that, I had met with Dr. Hollister again at a diner outside Hartford. He was nervous, looking over his shoulder constantly, stirring his coffee without drinking it. "I should have come forward sooner," he said. "When Sarah first gave me those documents, I told myself I would go to the authorities if anything happened to her. But then it did happen and I was afraid. Your family has resources. They have connections. I have seen what happens to people who make trouble for powerful families. What made you change your mind? Seeing you at the restaurant, standing in the rain, being turned away from a place that should have welcomed you." He shook his head. "I have a daughter about your age. I kept thinking about how I would feel if someone did to her what they did to Sarah. And I realized that my silence was making me complicit." He told me everything. How Sarah had come to him as a source, not a patient. How she had been investigating medical fraud at a clinic my family owned. How she had grown increasingly afraid as she realized the scope of what she was uncovering. "She knew they might kill her," he said. "She told me so in those exact words. And she did it anyway. That is the kind of woman she was." "Yes," I said. "It is." The FBI agent's name was Special Agent Diana Torres, and she was based out of the New Haven field office. She came to my motel room, the one I had been using as my base of operations, and spent 4 hours reviewing everything I had gathered. She was thorough, professional, and clearly experienced in handling sensitive cases. She asked questions that showed she understood the complexity of what we were dealing with, the layers of corporate structures and financial transactions that my family had used to hide their crimes. "This is substantial," she said when she finished. "I have seen money laundering cases before, but the scope of this. Your family has been operating for over 30 years. The amount of money that has moved through these accounts is in the hundreds of millions. Can you prove they killed my wife?" She hesitated, and I could see her weighing how much honesty I could handle. "That is more difficult. We can prove the financial crimes. We can prove they had motive to silence her. But proving murder requires evidence that your wife's death was not an accident." Dr. Hollister was a witness. Sarah called him the night she died. She was terrified. She specifically said my family was going to kill her. That is hearsay, valuable for context, useful for building a narrative, but not sufficient for a murder charge on its own. She paused. However, there are other avenues we can pursue. If we can prove that someone tampered with her car, that changes the equation. If we can find the person they hired to do it, even better. How do you find someone like that? We follow the money. Your family is good at hiding where money goes, but they are not perfect. There will be a payment somewhere, a transfer that does not fit the pattern. And when we find it, we can trace it back to whoever they hired. She was right. 3 months later, her team found a payment of $200,000 to a shell company in Florida that had been created 6 days before Sarah's death and dissolved 6 days after. The company's registered agent was a man named Vincent Caruso, a mechanic with a criminal record who had done work for organized crime families in the past. Caruso was arrested in Miami. Faced with federal charges and the prospect of spending the rest of his life in prison, he agreed to cooperate. He told the FBI everything. How my brother had contacted him through an intermediary. How he had been paid to tamper with Sarah's brakes in a way that would look like mechanical failure. How he had watched from a distance as her car went over the embankment, making sure the job was done. Your brother watched too, Caruso told Agent Torres. He was parked on the hill, maybe half a mile away. He had binoculars. He wanted to see it happen. When she told me that detail, I had to leave the room. I stood in the hallway of the FBI field office, hands shaking, trying to process the image of my brother watching my wife die through binoculars, making sure the murder he had ordered was completed. I want them to suffer, I told Agent Torres when I came back. I want them to lose everything. I want them to spend the rest of their lives knowing what they did. That is what we are going to make happen, she said. But we need to be smart about it. If we move too fast, if we give them any warning, they will destroy evidence and lawyer up. We need to build an airtight case before we make any arrests. How long? Another 3 months. Maybe 4. We need to flip more witnesses, gather more documentation, make sure every charge will stick. For more months of pretending to be part of their family. I know it is hard, but think about Sarah. Think about what she would want. She did not give her life so that her killers could escape on a technicality. She did it because she believed in justice. Honor that belief. Be patient. I was patient. For 4 more months, I continued the performance. I attended family dinners and birthday parties. I smiled and nodded and pretended to be healing. I let my mother believe that her plan had worked, that I was moving on, that Sarah's secrets had died with her. And I waited. The arrest happened on a Thursday morning, 6 months after the night at Giovanni's. Federal agents hit 4 locations simultaneously. My mother's house, my brother's office, my sister's apartment, and the headquarters of the family foundation, where decades of incriminating records were stored in filing cabinets that no one had bothered to destroy. I was not there. Agent Torres had advised me to be somewhere public with witnesses when the arrests went down, in case anyone decided that eliminating me was worth the risk. I spent that morning at Giovanni's, sitting at table 7, eating breakfast and watching the news on my phone. The coverage was immediate and extensive. A prominent local family, pillars of the community, arrested on federal charges including money laundering, wire fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy to commit murder. The murder charge had come through after all. My brother had broken first, agreeing to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence. He had testified that my mother had ordered Sarah's death, had hired someone to tamper with her car's brakes, had orchestrated the cover-up that followed. He had done it to save himself. But in doing so, he had given me the one thing I needed most, proof that Sarah had been murdered. I sat at our table in our restaurant and I cried. The trial lasted 4 months. It was held in federal court in Hartford, presided over by Judge Rebecca Morrison, a no-nonsense jurist with a reputation for running tight courtrooms and handing down harsh sentences for white-collar criminals. The prosecution team consisted of 6 attorneys, led by Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Chun, who had spent his career taking down organized crime families and corrupt politicians. The defense was equally formidable. My mother had hired the best lawyers money could buy, a team from a prestigious New York firm that specialized in defending wealthy clients from federal charges. They arrived each day in expensive suits, carrying matching briefcases, looking like they had stepped out of a legal drama on television. But the evidence was overwhelming. The prosecution called 47 witnesses over the course of the trial. Forensic accountants who traced the money through layer after layer of shell companies. Former employees who testified about suspicious activities they had witnessed. Bank officials who produced records of offshore accounts. Property managers who described buildings with hidden rooms and unexplained visitors. And Vincent Caruso, the mechanic who had tampered with Sarah's car. His testimony took 3 days. He described every detail of the murder, from the first contact with my brother's intermediary to the moment he watched Sarah's car go over the embankment. He described my brother watching through binoculars, waiting until the car stopped rolling, waiting until he was sure she was dead. The defense tried to discredit him, pointing out his criminal record, suggesting he was lying to reduce his own sentence. But Caruso had documentary evidence to back up his claims. Text messages, encrypted emails, bank transfers that matched exactly with the dates and amounts the prosecution had identified. My brother's face was gray by the time Caruso finished testifying. He knew. He knew that he was going to prison, that the careful life he had built was crumbling, that the family empire he had been groomed to inherit was being dismantled piece by piece in front of a packed courtroom. I testified too. The prosecution called me on the 32nd day of the trial. I sat in the witness box and looked at my family, seated at the defense table, wearing their expensive clothes and their carefully composed expressions. My mother met my eyes. She did not look angry or afraid. She looked disappointed, the way she had always looked when I failed to meet her expectations. As if I had let her down by not accepting Sarah's murder quietly, by not being the compliant son she had raised me to be. I told the jury everything. About meeting Sarah. About our marriage. About the night I discovered the truth. I described standing in the rain outside Giovanni's, being turned away from the place where I had proposed to my wife. I described the envelope Dr. Hollister had pressed into my hands. I described reading Sarah's letter in my car, rain drumming on the roof, my world collapsing around me. I described the months I had spent pretending, going to family dinners, accepting their false comfort, knowing that every person at that table had participated in covering up my wife's murder. Sarah was not just my wife, I said, looking directly at the jury. She was a journalist who believed that the truth matters. She believed it so strongly that she was willing to die for it. She discovered that my family, the people I had trusted my entire life, were criminals. She gave them a chance to come clean, and they killed her for it. I paused, gathering myself. The least I can do is make sure her death was not in vain. The least I can do is tell the truth she died for. The defense cross-examined me for 2 days. They tried to suggest that I had been unstable since Sarah's death, that my grief had warped my judgment, that I was seeking revenge rather than justice. I answered every question calmly, factually, without emotion. I had learned a lot from Sarah about how to withstand hostile questioning. I had learned even more from the months I spent pretending to be someone I was not. When the defense attorney suggested that I might have fabricated evidence to frame my family, I looked at him with the same cold composure my mother had taught me. I am an analyst, I said. I examine evidence. I follow patterns. I do not create them. Everything I have testified to is documented in the evidence this court has already seen. If you believe I am lying, show me where the documents are wrong. He could not, because the documents were not wrong, because Sarah had been meticulous, because the truth, no matter how painful, was on my side. The evidence was overwhelming. Financial records, testimony from my brother, documentation of the bribes that had kept local authorities from investigating Sarah's death. My mother's lawyers tried every possible defense, but the case was too strong. The jury deliberated for 6 days. 6 days of waiting. 6 days of pacing in my hotel room, unable to eat or sleep, wondering if somehow my family's money and influence would buy them an acquittal. When the verdict came, I was sitting in the front row of the courtroom, exactly where I had sat every day of the trial. Dr. Hollister was beside me. He had attended every session, bearing witness to the consequences of the courage he had finally found. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, the foreperson read, "We the jury find the defendant, Eleanor Webb, guilty." My mother did not react. She sat perfectly still, her spine straight, her face expressionless. Only her hands betrayed her, gripping the edge of the defense table so hard her knuckles turned white. The foreperson continued through the charges. Guilty on money laundering. Guilty on wire fraud. Guilty on tax evasion. Guilty on conspiracy to obstruct justice. Guilty, guilty, guilty. My brother was convicted on similar charges, plus the additional charge of soliciting murder. He broke down on the stand when the verdict was read, sobbing in a way I had never seen him sob before. My sister received a lighter verdict, convicted of conspiracy to commit fraud and money laundering but acquitted of the murder charges. The jury apparently believed that she had been less involved than the others, more of a beneficiary than a participant. I did not care about the distinctions. They were all going to prison. That was what mattered. She was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder, along with a dozen financial charges. She will spend the rest of her life in prison. My brother received 35 years for his role in ordering Sarah's death. My sister, who was less involved than the others, got 7 years. The foundation was dissolved. The properties were seized. The network my family had built over 3 decades was dismantled piece by piece. When the sentencing was complete, I walked out of the courthouse into the sunlight. Dr. Hollister was beside me. We did not speak. There was nothing to say. Justice had been done. Sarah's killers were going to prison. The truth she had died for was now public record. But she was still dead, and I was still alone. I live in a different city now. After the trial ended, after the sentencing was complete, after the last appeal was denied, I packed up the house I had shared with Sarah and moved away. I could not stay in Connecticut. Every street corner, every restaurant, every building reminded me of something. Of Sarah, of my family, of the lies I had believed for 38 years. I chose a city where I knew no one, a place where I could start over, build a new life, become someone different. I found an apartment, got a job, established routines that had nothing to do with my past. But the past does not disappear just because you move away from it. The past lives inside you. It shapes who you are, whether you acknowledge it or not. I still dream about Sarah sometimes. In the dreams, she is alive. We are sitting at Giovanni's at our table talking the way we used to talk. She tells me about her latest story, the injustice she is trying to expose, the truth she is fighting to uncover. I tell her about my day, the numbers I analyzed, the patterns I discovered. And then I wake up, and she is gone, and I remember everything. Dr. Hollister and I stay in touch. He testified at the trial, telling the jury about Sarah's fear, about the documents she had given him, about his year of silence and his eventual decision to speak. He cried on the stand when he talked about his cowardice, about the guilt he carried, about the knowledge that he could have come forward sooner. "You came forward when it mattered," I told him after the verdict. Sarah would have understood. She knew how hard it is to stand up to powerful people. She did not expect perfection from anyone. She expected it from herself. She was exceptional. Most people are not. Most people do the best they can with the courage they have. He nodded slowly, accepting the absolution I was offering. "Your wife was the bravest person I ever knew." "Yes," I said. "She was." I think about Dr. Hollister sometimes. The stranger who approached me in the rain. The man who had been a coward for a year and then decided he could not stay silent anymore. He taught me something important. He taught me that redemption is always possible, even after failure. That the choice to do the right thing can be made at any moment, even if you should have made it sooner. That courage is not about never being afraid. It is about acting despite the fear. I needed that lesson, because for most of my life I had been a coward too. I had accepted my family's version of reality without questioning it. I had looked away from things that did not quite make sense. I had chosen comfort over truth. Sarah changed that. Her death changed that. The discovery of what my family really was changed everything. I am a different person now than I was before. Harder, in some ways. More suspicious of easy answers and comfortable lies. Less willing to give people the benefit of the doubt. But also stronger. More certain of what I believe. More willing to stand alone against people who have power and resources and every reason to want me silent. Sarah taught me that. Her life taught me that. Her death taught me that. The truth matters. Even when it hurts. Even when it costs you everything. I went back to Giovanni's one last time before they tore down the building. The owner had retired after the trial, exhausted by the attention and the memories. The building sat empty for 2 years, slowly deteriorating, until the city condemned it and scheduled it for demolition. I drove back to Connecticut on a gray November day, parked in the lot behind the restaurant, walked around to the front entrance. The windows were boarded up now. Graffiti covered the walls. The sign that had once welcomed guests was faded and hanging at an angle. I stood in the spot where I had stood that rainy night 6 months after Sarah died. The spot where Dr. Hollister had approached me with the envelope that changed everything. I thought about Sarah, about our first conversation at that restaurant, two strangers recognizing something familiar in each other's loneliness. About the night I proposed, the way she said yes before I finished asking the question. About all the anniversaries we celebrated at table 7, raising glasses to another year of loving each other. I thought about the night I discovered the truth, the rain on my face, the envelope in my hands, the moment when my life split into before and after. I thought about my mother, rotting in a federal prison, stripped of the wealth and status she had spent her life accumulating. I thought about my brother, serving 35 years for ordering my wife's murder. I thought about my sister, counting the days until she could leave prison and try to rebuild a life that would never be the same. I did not feel sorry for any of them. I had searched my heart for sympathy and found nothing. They had made their choices. They had built their empire on lies and crime and eventually murder. They had destroyed my wife to protect their secrets. They deserved everything that happened to them. But I felt something else, something I had not expected. I felt grateful. Grateful for Sarah, for the years we had together, for the courage she showed in pursuing the truth, for the legacy she left behind, the example of someone who believed that some things are worth dying for. Grateful for Dr. Hollister, for his decision to approach me in the rain, for his willingness to overcome his fear and do the right thing, for the envelope that gave me the chance to seek justice. Grateful even for my family. Not for what they did, but for what they taught me. They taught me that the people closest to you can be the most dangerous. They taught me that wealth and status can hide the most terrible secrets. They taught me that you cannot trust anyone blindly, not even the people who share your blood. Those are hard lessons, painful lessons, but they made me stronger. They made me wiser. They made me into someone Sarah would have been proud of. I brought flowers, white roses, Sarah's favorite. I laid them on the doorstep of the abandoned restaurant, in the spot where I had stood in the rain, where my life had changed forever. I did it, I said, talking to Sarah the way I sometimes did when I was alone. I found the truth. I got justice. I made sure your death meant something. The wind picked up, scattering dead leaves across the parking lot. For a moment, just a moment, I thought I felt something. Presence. A warmth. As if Sarah was there with me, acknowledging what I had done, telling me she was proud. Then the moment passed, and I was alone again. I drove away from that place and I did not look back. Sarah would have wanted me to keep moving forward. She would have wanted me to find happiness again, to build a new life, to not let grief define me forever. I am trying to honor that. I am trying to be the person she believed I could be. It is not easy. Some days the grief is still overwhelming. Some days I wake up reaching for her, forgetting for a moment that she is gone. But I am still here, still standing, still carrying the truth she died for. That is what she taught me. That is her legacy. The truth matters, even when it hurts, even when it costs you everything, especially then. Thank you for walking this journey with me. Before you go, I have left 2 more stories here on your screen. Both from men who discovered that family is not always who you are born to. It is who stands by you when the truth comes out. Click on whichever one calls to you. And if you want to join our community of people who understand what it is like to be the outsider looking in, that notification bell is your invitation. Until tomorrow, remember, your story matters, even if they tried to erase it.